Hello again, and what is hip? And welcome back to another video. And today I wanted to talk about something a little bit obscure. I've been a Sega fan ever since I can remember, ever since I discovered the Sonic Mega Collection on the GameCube back when I was around 8, 9, 10 years old. And, you know, I'm an avid Sega fan, and I was introduced to the consoles kind of at a younger age through the early days of YouTube video gaming channels such as Classic Game Room or Happy Console Gamer and TV and Lust and other YouTubers from way back when. And so, you know, I was introduced to this whole world of Sega. And, you know, Sega is just super interesting. I think out of all the companies, by far, they were the most creative. They were willing to take some chances on things that maybe didn't pan out, but a couple of them did, and a couple of them maybe reached their full potential years after their demise. And one of those is the Sega Genesis. Now, not the Sega Genesis itself. The Sega Genesis was, I mean, incredibly popular. It was their most famous, most popular, best-selling video game console that they released. And definitely the one that gave Nintendo a run for its money back in the day. However, they released a bunch of different revisions of the Sega Genesis, and so it can get kind of confusing. They have the Model 1, which you see right here. This is kind of the standard one that everybody kind of knows about. The other really famous one that they released is the Model 2, which is much smaller. This has the Sega 32X add-on here, which we will ignore because yes, that's a whole other can of worms. And then they released another one, which was the Model 3, which was even smaller. And then you have the Sega CDX, which is back here, which is another revision. There's so many revisions. There was even another revision of the Model 1, where it didn't have the high-definition graphics at the top. That had a different audio chip, so the sound was different and arguably inferior than the original Model 1 release. And then same thing with the Model 2. You know, its benefit was that it was smaller, it was more compact. However, different sound chip. Couldn't display or show audio in the same level that the Model 1 could. And then the Model 3 couldn't play some Sega Genesis games. It was the cheapest one out of the bunch. And so there were a lot of sacrifices that came with each revision, along with some benefits. But the most important Sega Genesis add-on, I believe, is the Sega CD, and I don't believe the Sega Genesis reaches its full potential until the Sega CD is in the mix. And I say that because the Sega CD was just, it had a great library of games when compared to the Sega 32X, which had like 20, 30 plus games, and the majority of them were not very good. But the Sega CD had a larger library. They had lots of good games. You had like Sonic CD, you had great RPGs such as the Lunar series, Vey, another great RPG. You had strategy RPGs such as Dark Wizard and Shining Force CD, and then you had some wonderful platformers like Sonic CD, as I mentioned. And you had one of the definitive versions of Road Rash. There were so many great games released on the Sega CD. And that's why I believe if you own a Genesis, you're not getting the true, full, complete experience until you add the Sega CD in the mix. And I wanted to talk about the best revision, the best all-in-one unit that you could get with the Sega Genesis, because there's just so many. And my pick is one that is relatively obscure and it kind of scares people off because it's so obscure and people believe, oh, it's so rare and all of that, which it is, but they get scared off by the potential of price and all of that. But I'm here to kind of clear things up. So, as I said, this is going to be talking about the best Sega Genesis all-in-one unit minus the 32X, so Genesis and Sega CD. So Sega CD, we have the Model 1 right here. This one is not completely functioning, as the Sega CD units are known to fail. And the Sega CD units are also incredibly expensive. So you have the Model 1, which is the most unreliable and the most expensive of the bunch. Stay away from that, it's just a lot of money. The one that most people go for is the Sega Genesis, or the Sega CD Model 2, which was it made the Genesis very wide. You had to get an extension for it to work on, well, not to work, but to sit flush with the Model 1 Genesis. And it was just, it was like a Siamese twin almost. You know, you have this big old thing extension to the side of it. And so that is the most cheap version of the Sega CD that you can buy. It's also one of the more reliable ways to have a Sega CD, since again they're prone to break and such, but the Model 2 has a much better track record with that. However, the little known thing I was talking about was this guy right here, and this is the JVC X'eye. And the reason why this is the definitive, what I believe to be the definitive version of the Sega Genesis, is a numerous amount of things. So the JVC X'eye was kind of released due to a deal that Sega and JVC had for helping develop the sound chip in the Sega Genesis. Because of that, part of the deal was that they could kind of develop their own version of the Genesis, kind of licensing out the Genesis name and such to JVC so they can make their own thing. And this was known as the Wonder Mega in Japan, which was arguably better than the American version since it had S-video and such. However, it's also incredibly expensive, so that's why we're not going to talk about that. The American version ditched the S-video, but you still have so many of the great features. And if you hook this up with like the HD Retrovision cables, which work directly with this because it uses the same AV out as the Model 2 Genesis, and you hook that up to like a RetroTink or some upscaler, it looks great. So the JVC X'eye is a Genesis and a Sega CD melded into one, and I love this unit so much because it's so compact. And as I've stated many times, I live in New York, I have a small place, I don't have a lot of room, and so this allows me to save some space and still get the enjoyment of the Sega CD and Sega Genesis together. You also lose one of the power adapters, which is really nice because the Sega CD had its own separate power adapter. This combines it into one for the JVC X'eye, which is really nice. So instead of two, you got one power adapter. Also, this is not region locked. Now, the original Genesis is not region locked either, but it had like a physical hardware region lock. The actual cartridge slot had a different cutout, so Mega Drive games would not fit. This has a completely rectangular cartridge slot, so you can play Mega Drive and Genesis games in here no problem without having to adjust anything, mod anything. Works right out of the box, which is really great. And then you have the Sega CD add-on, and this is known to be the most reliable of the Sega CD versions. These things are built like a tank. They are also incredibly easy to work on, which is a big thing because the Model 1 here is so incredibly hard to work on. Getting in here and doing repairs is just a pain in the butt. And again, they're also more prone to breaking and all of that. Sega CD Model 2 is a little better, but still kind of hard to work on when compared to this. This is super easy. It's just one big flat thing when you open it up, and it's a dream to work on, and just more reliable all around because they were built like tanks here. And it's just a really well put together system. And one of the things about this that scares people off is that it's so rare. About 10,000 of these units were, I believe, sold in the United States because it came out at a much higher price point back then. And so they're hard to find. And this is more expensive than your Sega Genesis and your Sega Genesis CD Model 2. But I'm gonna justify the price increase here. So you can find these at conventions. You know, they're surprisingly common for as rare as they are. I see them pop up for around $350, $400. I see these pop up. However, if you do your research and you do enough looking and you look on eBay and all that, you can find them around the $300 mark. That's kind of what I got mine for. Mine was a little under 300. But if you do enough looking, you can find them for around the $300 mark. Now, the Sega CD Model 2, you can get working for around $150 or so, and then top that with the Genesis, another $50. So you can get the combo for around $200, maybe give or take a little more or a little less depending on the day of the week and where you are. So you're going to be spending, if you do your research, about $100 more on this. Now, that is, again, no small amount of change. I know that completely. However, you just get a much more reliable experience with this. You get something that is compact, and you may be wondering, what about the Sega CDX right here, which was also a combo unit and also incredibly small, prone to breaking, also incredibly expensive. I don't use mine because I'm scared of it falling apart. So this, again, is much more reliable. And you get something that is not region locked. You can play all the games on here, and it's just an all-around well-built, better built unit. You lose one of the extra power adapters. It's just a really nice convenience. And in the days where you have analog with their version of the Genesis, which was, I think, like around $200 or so, things are getting so much more expensive, and I think it doesn't hurt to go back and get something like this, which is totally original, totally reliable. You hook this up with an upscaler, it looks great, it looks amazing, and I think it's worth the extra little bit of money. However, again, you can't go wrong with any version of the Genesis, minus the Genesis Model 3. But if you want the best experience possible, I really do believe the JVC X'eye is the way to go. But yeah, that's just kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Have you guys ever experienced the JVC X'eye? Have you heard? Did you know it existed? Do you have one? Let me know in the comments below. Yeah, it's just a super, super cool system, and I really do think that it's worth the price, and it is my favorite Genesis console in my collection. But thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.